already showed up. Representative Perry represents District 21, which covers large portions of Dixie, Gilchrist, and Alachua counties. How many of his constituents are in the room for Representative Perry? And behind. So, you've got quite a few here. Representative Perry was raised in Gainesville, graduating from Buckholz High School in 1976. After high school, he pursued a career in the roofing business by starting his own business with a friend as a way to save money for college. However, that practical wish quickly turned into a lifelong career which had him climbing on roofs instead of attending college. Well, there are a lot of kids that would like to have done that. His company, Perry Roofing Contractors, is now a successful force in the state with 150 employees and 3 offices throughout Florida. Representative Perry serves as the Vice Chair of the Healthy Family Subcommittee and also serves as a member of the Education Appropriations Subcommittee, the Education Committee, the Economic Affairs Committee, and the Transportation Highway Safety Subcommittee. Representative Perry has been married to his wife, Amy, for 19 years. Congratulations. And they have 2 beautiful daughters, Amanda and Alexis. Is that Amanda?
No.
Oh, sorry. So, without further ado, let's welcome Representative Perry.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon. I was going to tell you something, embellish my story about me, but I got people from my district, so I can't even make up something. Hold me accountable. My name is Keith Perry. Grew up in Gainesville. The district I represent is half of Alachua County, all of the University of Florida, all of Santa Fe, and then goes west, Gilchrist, and Dixie County. And it's a little amazing. People wonder how you get a conservative out of Gainesville to start with. My father was a professor at the University of Florida. I grew up in that environment around an extremely liberal group of people. We would have people over the faculty that would come over from the psychology department at the University of Florida. Believe me, that was a strange group and conversation that went on there. So my mother, Christian, conservative, thank goodness I took after her. She had a little more influence on my life. And so I grew up much different, conservative. I started a business when I got out of high school, and I've done that for 36 years. So building a business, working in that, certainly puts you in a different perspective on life. What I want to do, they asked me to come up here and talk about a couple of bills that we're looking at running up in Tallahassee. I said, good, I come here and I think about 5 minutes. I said, well, you got a little bit more time than that. I don't think I'll use all of my time, but I will explain some of the bills and just a little bit about some things I think we ought to be concerned with and be aware of. So 2 of the bills that we've got, that we've already got the language done, we filed it last year, but we didn't ever get it filed on the Senate side, so we never went anywhere. We've already got our Senate sponsor on board, and we're going to look at making sure it goes through this year. Basically, one of the bills does a couple of things. What it says is if the state of Florida or the federal government have rules and regulations in place, local counties and cities cannot exceed those regulations or those rules or those and have overlays on top of those. Now, if it was up to me, we'd get rid of the federal stuff in Florida too. We're taking what we think is an achievable, bite-sized chunk at a time. And believe me, even this bill, which may seem benign to some, is going to be very difficult when the League of Cities and the counties get wind of this. It is going to be an all-out fight. But what we have happening, we're from Gainesville, we can talk to some of my friends from Gainesville, and you're going to see, when you talk about Agenda 21, and you see some of the presentation that just happened, you're going to see that in full force. In Gainesville today, there's certainly other places of the state that are doing that now. And these are not state nor federal. These are local governments pushing this agenda, Agenda 21, on top of it. So at least if we can get this bill passed, it will stop at least some of this progress that they've been making and start reversing that trend. So you may read, if you read the Gainesville Sun or the St. Louis Times, you're going to find a lot of things written about me. I guess, well, yeah, and I've been told it's just as good to be admired by the admirable as it is to be despised by the despicable. So when you read those things, maybe that's a good thing for me when the St. Louis Times starts writing stuff like that. The other component of that bill is what's called a double nexus. Right now, cities and counties impose impact fees, and those impact fees are for infrastructure needs for that particular development. But what they have to have is a rational nexus or direct nexus. So if in fact you have to put a turn lane in a new development, new neighborhood, okay, you got to do that. You're not going to go a mile down the road and build a new intersection, or 7 miles down the road, like in the Coombs lawsuit, and improve state land. And so it will limit any impact fees directly to whatever that development is, and they'll have to prove that that has the impact and it's relative to that. But again, these are bite-sized chunks. If it was up to me, I think that growth pays for itself and probably shouldn't have any impact fees. I think that they're just an extra tax. But again, what we're doing is incrementally trying to win this battle on property rights. So we've got that. I got to put my glasses on. We do not have a bill number. When I get that, you'll see that. I don't think we have a bill number. No. Caroline Anderson is one of my district secretaries in the back here with me. So
we'll send all that out when the bill number.
yeah, if you're on the website, that's going to be one of the best ways to see where this is, to keep up with it. You can certainly call my office at any time, and we can tell you about where these bills are, what committees they're going to, when you can send emails out, when you can be in contact with your state representative. As Dan said, when we get 100, 200, 1,000 emails a day sometimes on real controversial issues, if they're not in my district, they're deleted. I mean, because it's not I don't care about other people outside the state of Florida. I just don't have enough, outside of my district. I don't have enough time to answer those, and so I'm not as concerned about people outside of my district, and neither are the other representatives. So it's important that you need to stay in touch with your representative, with your state senator on these issues. The other bill that we're looking at, and I'm telling you what, Dan's been incredible help to me on these issues. The other is just a personal property rights bill, which turns the onus on a government agency to prove issues that come up before you right now. When you have to take it before a building department or improvement of land or land use development, you have to prove to them certain things. We're going to put that back onto the government agency. This is where Dan, this is not where I have an expertise in, but Dan has helped me and some other people have helped me on this issue. So we're working on the language on that right now. We've got some rough draft language on that. Certainly be glad to get that to anybody who wants to read that. Anybody who has expertise in this, anybody who has legal background or a friend in property rights, property development, dealing with government agencies, I value your opinion. Because my goal is not to have language that's ambiguous or that a government agency can look at and say, well, we don't interpret it that way. We interpret it this way. We don't want that. Now, that may happen anyway, but our goal is to make it as clear as we can, as black and white as it can, so when these issues come up, these government agencies will not have a chance to wiggle through and have their own interpretations. I'm just going to read a couple of other bills that are out there that other representatives are looking at, we're looking at. We're trying to find bill sponsors for them. In Tallahassee, a representative can run 6 bills. That's all you can run. And you get fundated. There's 9 bills here, just on property rights. And so we have to pick and choose which ones we're going to run, which ones have the most merit, and work on those. So we'll have to find other representatives that will be willing to run these. On the Senate side, they can run as many bills as they want, but it doesn't help them unless they have a House sponsor as well. Yes, sir.
Sponsorship or just initiating?
Well, sponsorship.
So you can only sponsor?
You can only sponsor 6 bills. You can co-sponsor as many bills as you want, but that doesn't have a whole lot of effect except for putting your name on something and maybe put a little more credence behind that bill. But as far as bills that you can sponsor, the limit is 6. And so we got to look carefully, because when I first got out there, I said, maybe we don't need any bills, we need to get rid of all the bills. And we have a process of repealing a lot of antiquated, outdated, redundant bills or over-regulatory bills. We have that process too. A lot of bills we do are fix-it bills, like these, or fix-it bills that take a system and try to make it better. Representative Stone had a bill last year that we're going to look at again, and it's prior to the purchase that they have to produce, that the government has to produce inventory of conservation lands, have money budgeted for maintenance, and produce a study showing the maintenance cost of proposed new purchases. So we put a little bit on that government to say, you just can't do what you want to do without any future planning. You understand that we would never do that in business, we never do it in our own home, we wouldn't just go make some purchase and not realize what the cost, long-term costs are. So that's what Representative Stone's bill would do. And he's out of, anybody from Ocala, that's where Representative Charlie Stone's from. Another bill would require property owners to be notified by registered letter of any changes to future land use map affecting their property's designation and how these changes might affect their current zoning. So right now, they're not notified officially, and this is to give them some heads up before all of a sudden they find out after it's too late. Require FLMUDMs, to be updated annually to accurately reflect conservation lands and post the most current map on the website. So what we want them to do is put it on there. So all this land is going into conservation. I think we talked about conservation easements as well, which right now is not reflected, is to have that on there so you can see what's happening in all the land that is currently being taken off the tax roll, put into the government's hands, whether that's through purchase or whether through conservation easements. Require all comp plans changed to be based on the best scientific data and analysis and posted on the website. A little gray area of how what do we classify as scientific evidence? And I don't know, Dan, you talked about your septic tank study that was done. Did you talk about that? You know, there's a septic study in the Wakaiba Basin area. That data is based on 3 septic tanks in different areas. That one was outdated, the septic tank was anyway. We use that data. So we want to make sure there's some teeth in it, that they don't have data that is just that would not be scientifically or would not be accepted in any other circumstance. So we have to work on the language on that and make sure that we have, again, that we have it where the counties and cities and states can't make these arbitrary decisions without really good facts. Another bill would be require county governments and property appraisers to post on their website a map showing all the government and privately owned conservation projects, and whether they are open to the public or closed to the public. So that's another one. If they're going to have these properties, they're going to take them off, they're going to buy them from us for conservation, take them out for conservation easement. We want to know, are we allowed to go on those? If it's for the public, if it's for you and I, it's being sold as that, are we going to be allowed to use that? Or is that where human traffic is not allowed? And that's happening right now. So that require them to post that, and you can easily see that if we get this bill passed. Another bill would be private property owners with property bordering on sovereign submerged lands should be notified by the state where their bordering property line is drawn. Property owners should be responsible to pay taxes only on the property defined by that line. So now, there's areas, people live on lakes or rivers, and they have high water marks and low water marks. If the state wants to come by it, they pay for the high water mark, I think. They pay for the least amount of land you have, but you're paying taxes on the highest amount of land that you have now. So trying to get some clarification for people who live in these areas. Another bill would be require water management district budget to be approved by the legislature. So right now it's not. They are under the legislature, but their budgets are not under the legislature. So the career employees of the water management district create a budget, levy, this is what they do now. Levy ad valorem taxes, own, purchase huge tracts of land, make laws, they call them rules. If you got to buy them or you go to jail, that's a law. Impose laws, rules, hire lobbyists to lobby the legislature, influence local government policy, and fine and penalize the regulated public. All with little oversight from the non-compensated appointed board of governors who have no support staff of their own. The governing board members do not have the time, wherewithal, or in most cases, the inclination or ability to challenge the staff recommendations at their monthly meetings, which usually last about 3 days. Budget hearings in Tallahassee would bring much needed accountability. So trying to bring a little accountability to the water management districts, look at their budgets. This is benign when you say we're not telling them they're doing a bad job, we're not doing that, we're just telling them there needs to be accountability in it. With the power that they have now, without that accountability, is not a good recipe. Okay, that's bills. They told me to fill up a little bit of time, they gave me a little more time to speak. So just briefly, I want to talk about why I have an interest and why I think it's so important that we all have such an interest in that. You know, the American dream, part of the American dream, has been home ownership. Always has been. And I don't believe that is an American dream. I believe it's a human dream. I think we all have that desire. I think the difference is why it's an American dream is because America, the United States, was the first country in history that allowed average, ordinary people the opportunity to buy and purchase land and build a home. That's why it's an American dream, because this is where it started with that opportunity. And that opportunity is not there. And I think if you look at, historically, not even that far away, if you think about personal property rights and how important they are, and there's some studies by some economists out there, well, take just Hong Kong and Japan post-World War II. So Hong Kong is a refugee camp. Post-World War II, the Chinese take over, the communists take over China. There's all these people fleeing the communist oppression in China. A lot of them end up in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a little inlet. The only natural resource they have, it's a harbor. That's it. It's a area controlled by Britain at the time. Britain is rebuilding. They were devastated after World War II. They don't have any time to deal with Hong Kong, so they just kind of let it go, and the governor has a lot of freedom to do what he wants to in Hong Kong. So what does he do? The basic model of what our country was founded on. The government is responsible for infrastructure, safety, and they allowed freedom to own property. Very little other from the government in that regard. Just the basic necessities of what a government is supposed to provide. 35 years later, Hong Kong, a refugee camp, had a skyline that competed with New York City. No government intervention, no government health care, no government program, no Common Core. So that shows what can happen when people are allowed to pursue their dreams. Japan was the same way. Japan was always based on a system of community, either community-owned or really a feudal system where a few people ruled, a few people had control of all of the land, and then all the other the people were really peasants or at the mercy of the landowners or the large landowners. So when MacArthur comes in post-World War II, does the same thing. A streamlined business approach, infrastructure needs, personal property rights, individual property rights, and you saw the same thing happen in Japan. In 30 years, they also had this, one of the most booming economies in history for such a small island with not all the natural resources, with the ability for people to have their own property. We see that now in China. China has one of the fastest growing middle classes, not an advocate for Chinese policies, don't get me wrong. But what's the difference in the last 20 years in China is for the first time, they're allowing people to own property. That's the main difference in China is the personal property right ownership. Now, if you go to the urban areas where you have one of the fastest growing middle classes and a lot of the wealthiest people in the world, you go 100 miles away into the rural areas where they still have community-owned property. And when it's community-owned, there's still a couple of people who rule. It's the community that owns it, a couple of people make all the decisions. And they're farming with oxen and pig. In those areas where they don't have personal property rights and freedoms. So those are just some real examples of what's happened recently in modern history. Another thing that's happened here, we talk about the American dream and home ownership. Home ownership now, if you look at just in the last 30 years, 35 years, you can see a pretty dramatic change in the family structure of the United States. You have from a two-parent, single income to a two-parent, two-income, and a single-parent, single-income family. So the majority, 35 years ago, two parents, one income. But for the middle class, they have less disposable income than they did 35 years ago for the moderate income. Have less disposable income. So you might want to ask yourself, well, where is that money going? Why do we have less money now? And where are we spending more money? A couple examples. I think about clothes. Clothes are more expensive. We have designer jeans, designer handbags. You have kids who wear $150 tennis shoes. Clothes are 36% cheaper today than 35 years ago. Food is 18% cheaper than 35% than 35 years ago. Cars, 34% cheaper. And I don't know about if y'all you remember. Back in the 70s, our cars didn't have near the amenities that cars have on them today, but they're 34% cheaper today than they were back 35 years ago. So we think we can have less money. Huh? It's cheaper. Their cars are 34% cheaper today, adjusted for inflation. Everything's adjusted for inflation. Okay. So we spend less of our income on cars than we did 35 years ago. So that's where we're even the other side. We should have more money in those examples. So there's some other examples of where we spend money. I'll give you the top three. The top three are taxes. 25% more of your income today, adjusted for inflation, goes to taxes. 25%. The second one, healthcare. 74% more to cover healthcare and insurance. You know what the number one is? Housing. The number one increase in the last 35 years for the moderate income family is housing, at 76% increase. A lot of debate on healthcare, a lot of talk about that, and there should be. It's the wrong direction, unfortunately. Government control, government oversight, and making it out of a free economy model has created this problem we have in healthcare. Housing is the government's involvement as well. And if you think about Agenda 21, if you think about our personal property rights, if you think about less land that's usable to develop, you think about the taxes, you think about liability from insurance, legal issues, 76% increase, the largest increase for moderate income people, and there's very little talk about it. It's like, well, that's normal, we should just let it go. I think it's a fundamental, I believe we all think this, it's a fundamental right, home ownership, it's the American dream. But there's just no talk about it. And so that's where, and I'm glad y'all are here, we're talking about personal property rights on this issue, and that's why it's becoming important to me in Tallahassee, is that we do this. There's no data to back this up, but if you think about a couple other changes, and I think home ownership has a lot to do with it. Savings 35 years ago, the average family saved about 11% of their annual income. Remember, that was mostly a single income. Today, collectively, it's less than 0%. Less than zero. So you take all the debt, some people save, some people are in debt. Collectively, we're less than 0%. Does that have anything to do with home ownership? I think it indirectly has some, because I think people who own homes become more responsible, they think about their future, they think about their investment, keeping their investment. Another issue that's not related directly, unwed birth rates. In 1970, it was about 18%. Today, it's hovering just under 50%. And we're not talking about divorced families. We're talking about kids who grew up with not both parents ever. They've never been married. Just under 50%. That's just in the last 30 years you've seen this dramatic change. I was thinking, and I was just listening the other day, when people think the government is the solution. I think we're the solution. I can tell you my 3 years in Tallahassee, I promise you, you're the solution. And Washington and Tallahassee, your local city governments are not the solution. This is just an example, and this is why we have to talk about the argument and how we go forward with our argument, because it's not a logical debate when you're talking about progressive people. They don't think logically at all. Right? Everybody heard of a food desert? Y'all heard of that? Okay, the federal government came up with these things, these are food deserts. What is a food desert? A food desert is a place where they have an area where you cannot buy healthy food. Now, in these areas you can buy food, it's just not healthy. You can buy, there's a high concentration of liquor stores, cigarette stores, drug stores, and gas stations that sell bad food. So the federal government, in their infinite wisdom, and Obama says, well, we got to solve this problem. We can't have people that can't go buy good food, so we're going to subsidize. They've already, last year I think they spent $400 million on the federal government side, trying to give tax breaks and other things, these people who sell food or whatever they can do. That's on top of all the major cities are doing the same thing as well. Okay, so you think logically, why do we have a problem? Well, most of these people are on food stamps. With a food stamp, you can buy unhealthy food. So it's not that there's no choice. There's no choice because the free market says, well, they're not buying healthy food, so we're not going to put it on our shelves. It's black and white. It's real simple. You make a food stamp where you can buy healthy food, guess what? There's going to be healthy food in there because that's what they're going to buy. That's all they're going to buy. If you give them an opportunity, people an opportunity, they're going to make decisions on their own. And I don't care how you subsidize it. What you're doing is you're taking a stupid problem and making it worse. That's typical federal government at work. That's typical state government at work. So what we have to do is understand, which we do. This is a key. I'll close with it. How do we communicate? Like Dan said, we can't say things in a certain way because the logic does not affect the other side. We understand that anecdotally, it's true. The other side doesn't look logical, they look emotional. So if we have a logical argument, we're going to lose. So what we have to do, we got to understand too, we got to understand the side. I can't remember what he just said, millennium, they've just changed the name, right? They don't come up and say, you know, their slogan is that we're going to take all your land away and control it all like the communists. That's not their slogan. That's what they're doing. They don't say it that way. And if we want to communicate effectively, then we need to be, we're smarter than them. We have better logic than them, but we have to communicate better. So we can't go tell, I can't go tell the University of Florida students, I can't even use the word capitalism. Capitalism is law control. I'm an evil business person who wants to exploit me. So what do? You talk about the model that there is now, which is a top-down, heavy-handed, control, uniformity, conformity model that they do now. That's the system we have in place. So we change it. We need an organic, a bottom-up, a freedom, an opportunity for you to use your talents and skills and change the world. That's how I have to talk to them. And it's true. I'm just not saying capitalism.
Nicely done.
So think about our message, how important it is that we educate these people. And remember, if you think we're going to win tomorrow, we're not. They've had 60 years in the education system to indoctrinate a certain way of thinking. So our goal is to be logical, smart, have a game plan, and pursue that game plan through a good educational system, not a frontal attack. They didn't win by a frontal attack. They won by around the end. We're going to do the same thing. If we're smart, or not if we're smart, because we are, if we act smart. Okay? So, thank you. That's it.
Could you comment on what you see happening on Common Core up in Tallahassee this year? I believe you're on the Education Committee, and hopefully you've got some insight into maybe a strategy that we could use to certainly slow it down and preferably stop it.
Well, there's been one bill already introduced. I haven't read that language, but Representative Mayfield has already introduced a bill to put it on hold. I'm gonna be perfectly honest. This may upset you, it may not. I don't make decisions based on what I read on the internet. I don't base decisions based on what I read in a blog. I don't base decisions that way. So I think that there's some of the data and some of the information that's being spread is absolutely legitimate, and we have a huge concern. We need to look at that. I think a lot of the information may not be legitimate. For example, we were told, here's a book that's being, under Common Core, is going to be put out in the public school system to read. It is a trashy adult book that should never be in a high school, ever. The problem is it's been there for 16 years. And so we can't think that if we do something with Common Core is not that problem. Now there's problems with Common Core. There's a lot of issues that we got to deal with. But thinking Common Core, if Common Core went away today, that book is still on the textbooks in the high school. I mean, and it is a trashy, it's not appropriate, it's not educational to have that on the thing. So what we're doing is we got reams of stuff. We're trying to take out fact from fiction and say, what is it? What is statutorily? Where is these things? If you got rid of Common Core, where is the problem still going to be? And we're still going to have a problem. We have a problem in the education system, big time. And so we have to look at those things, and we have to. But I'd encourage everybody that just because you read it from somebody else doesn't mean it's true. And we can't have mob mentality. We should have good intellectual debate based on real data. And so we're looking at that. We've been working on that for, as you can well imagine, for months. This year, I think what you'll see legislatively, you're going to see if there'll either be a complete stop or there'll be a total slow down. I don't know what they're going to do exactly. You know, I'm looking, like I say, we haven't even looked at Mayfield's bill yet. It kind of puts on temporary hold. But there's issues with Common Core, and there's issues with the education system as a whole. So, probably didn't answer your question great. I'm just not quite sure how we're going to do it. We're going to do something. Yes, sir. Well, I'm one. Dan? Well, Dan, you know, is it? I'm sorry?
It's like a group of conservatives in the legislature, or just the people who go around.
Well, the Florida House is majority of, not just Republicans, of conservative Republicans. There's certainly Republicans who are not conservative. Our biggest problem in the Florida legislature is the Senate, where the Senate has a small group of conservative Republicans, a small group of very liberal Democrats, and a middle group of Republicans that are self-serving, maybe. And it's unfortunate, but that's the way the system is. And as you're involved throughout the state from a political standpoint, I think the Tea Parties in particular need to look at every single Senate race. We've had very good legislation that's passed the House and has not passed the Senate because the Senate is not nearly as conservative as the House is. So those things we got to look at on good policy that needs to be passed. And when I say we, I just mean whoever's working with me and whoever I can work with. I'm one out of 120. For me to get my stuff done, to be a good representative for you, is to work with other people in the House. And I work with, like Dan, on policy, on language, on bills, on understanding, making sure that the bills that we write, and the bills that we present, do have the intended consequence that we want. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious, why is there a limit on this erosion? Is that because it was overwhelmed and Congress passed?
We can't understand the word you're saying.
He's asking, why is there a limit of 6 bills that we can file? Good question. It is a limited amount of time. Right now, my second year, in one day, and you got to remember, we start committee week. We'll start next week in Tallahassee on committees, and we'll spend some time. I know I took this part-time job on, but we'll start in September. We'll start for a week. Next month, we'll start for a couple of weeks. We'll be doing committees, so bills can be heard in there. Session is 60 days, including weekends. In one day, we heard, debated, voted on 72 bills in one day. That's too many. That's way too many bills to hear and make sure you're doing a good job in voting, making sure what you're voting on is what you want to vote on. So there's good reasons to have 6 bills, and simply because of the time constraints and the compression of time and how many bills we're hearing. Now, if you repeal a bill, that opens you up another slot. So you repeal one, and we have a whole committee last year set up. Will Weatherford set up a committee that is strictly to look at repealing bills. One of the first bills I did was a repeal bill that was 1899 written, and anybody knows Liz Porter here in Lake City? She repealed a bill that had telegraph offices, the days and hours they had to be open, and how many people had to man the telegraph offices. We thought that was one we could probably go ahead and get rid of, and we did so. So they don't have to keep open anymore. Anything else? Yes, sir.
In New Hampshire, they have a committee, a constitutional committee, and none of the bills will be introduced until it goes through the constitutional committee and verifies compliance. How would you feel about that before?
Talking about a constitutional convention?
Committee. The constitutional committee, none of the bills will be heard until they get through that committee.
Okay, you're talking about on the congressional level.
No, state level.
That all bills go through the Constitution Committee before they go on.
That would be, if I'm understanding it right, all bills have to go through the constitutional committee to start with,
That's
before they can move on.
So that no bill gets heard unless it passes constitutional muster.
Yep.
Both the state and the federal.
Well, I mean, we personally, on my bills that I either have personally or what I support, that's my first rule, is the Constitution. Unfortunately, that's not true by a lot of legislators and certainly by Congress on the national level. So real quickly, I'll tell you how strongly I feel about that, and if that's a solution, if that's an answer, that's something we ought to try and look at. I'd like to talk to you about how they do that up there. But, and I tell this to some, especially younger people, although they don't know, if you think about the Constitution and how important it is, our founding fathers were pretty bright people, and they understand the limitations that man has on controlling himself. And that's why you had to have a Constitution that says, we're not going to do whatever you want to do, we're going to do what the Constitution allows you to do. And I tell groups that if you think about Egypt and the Troubles, Anwar Scott, 32 years ago, was the president of Egypt. He was assassinated. They have news reporters over in Egypt, and they're talking to a Middle Eastern expert, and he's talking about, well, we live in the Constitution, and the Speaker of the Parliament is next in line to be the president of Egypt. And the Middle Eastern expert looks at him in somewhat of a rhetorical way and says, well, who's the leader of the military? The reporter says, that's Hosni Mubarak. And the guy looks at him and says, that'd be your next leader. That'd be the next president. Because the people of Egypt don't understand, nor do they even care about their constitution. And so then you have a dictator, takes over for the next 31 years, and then they move into another thing where they rewrite the constitution. So personally, I'd love to talk about that. I think everything needs to be based on the Constitution. Everything needs to have grounded on that. Unfortunately, that's just not the way people interpret it as this living, breathing, changing, however they want to interpret the Constitution. That's Egypt. That's what happens when we don't have that foundation on the Constitution. So I'd like to talk about it, but maybe that's something we can look at and implement here in Florida, and I'd be happy to do that. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
Concerned person, Plum 4, and through discussions with our superintendent of schools in Swanee County and the director of curriculum, they announced that the last 5 to 8 years it wasn't important to teach spelling, punctuation, or capitalization. And I'm like, when did this happen? I went to school 50 years ago, and I was in school till I was 21. And that was always a priority. My son went to school, and that was a priority. My grandson is going to be 13, he's in school, and I made sure it's a priority for him to know spelling. So we're in big trouble that the basic education isn't being taught, and then we're going into Palm 4 with all this government agenda, the data mining, and all this other stuff, information collecting. We're just asking for more trouble.
Well, and what I want you to make sure you do is don't focus only on Common Core and its problems. Let's focus on the education system. In the last 40 years, the United States has gone from number 1 in the world in literacy to number 50 or 56th in literature in 40 years. So the changes that you're talking about, the problems we have not started yesterday or they're not starting tomorrow. They've been going on. And we have an education system in 17, when at the founding of our country, if you look at to get into college, you had to speak 3 different languages. You had to translate a book in the Bible into Greek. You were 17 when you got in there. What it took back then, the education system with them was much more challenging. My kids go to a private school, it's a classical Christian, where the education system is like they taught back then, and there's a foundation to build. It's not the new edutainment, they call it today, where you want to make sure you entertain kids while they're getting educated. So there has to be a burden, and Merriam-Webster even said, when they started the education, it says a teacher never wants to bring themselves down to a little kid. You have to challenge them, and you have to draw it up. And if we take kids today and think, well, they're not smart enough to learn this stuff, then they're not going to be smart enough to learn stuff. So the standards have to be brought up. We have to have more, I think, basic curriculum. In classical education, if you study that, you can see where it worked. There's a spelling test. I found my great-grandfather's spelling test from 2nd grade. There's words, I don't even know what they are. I can't even pronounce them. My mom couldn't pronounce them. My friends looked at them. And these are spelling tests for 2nd or 3rd graders. I mean, the education system has dropped. And 200 years ago, or not even 200 years ago, when Tocqueville, Alexis de Tocqueville came around, he talked about people, he couldn't find people who didn't know and understand and revere the Constitution and understand and read. I mean, everywhere he traveled in the 1830s, everybody was literate that he came in contact with in the 1830s. In the 1760s, I think it was John Adams said he couldn't find anybody. When they had Common Sense go out, everybody could read that book, everybody. Now you try to get it out, and you have people who wouldn't understand it, just couldn't read it. So again, we've got to look at the education system as a whole, but not one of those components.
Well, that's what I mean. These teachers, seems to me, on their own, they have taken upon themselves not to teach spelling, punctuation, capitalization, and other things. And they want the students to write essays and paragraphs, but they haven't taught them the basic components of writing. So I'm wondering who, for all these years, has not been policing the students or the teachers.
Well,
To see if you're teaching correctly and making sure that the student is learning.
well, no, I get it. I understand. And where the problem started and how we're going to fix it, you know, that's what we're working on. And again, my background is not in education. My father was an educator. I was not. I was in construction. But those are things that are absolutely true we need to look at, and we're doing it. And we're looking at what do we need to do. One of the things, and I told, the first time I ran 3 years ago, I told everybody in the audiences, because we'd have school board members, I said one of the most important races in this room is the school board. It's not the governor, it's not the president, those are important, it's not state representative. I think one of the most important races is school board members. And we need to have more control locally where you people have access. But we're also looking at some other things. Just to let you know, a couple other things we're looking at in that thing. It's hard for me as a state representative to find the curriculum that they're teaching. It's hard for me to get into a school and find out what are they teaching. Planned Parenthood has some programs in the public schools, and I haven't been able to get the access to that information of what they're even teaching our kids. So that's got to change. And we all, as citizens, need to put pressure on our local school boards saying, you're going to show us, we want to know what the curriculum is. So, yes, sir. Well, and that's why you have to be involved. I think the teachers' unions have way too much influence on local school board elections. And when they dominate, so that's why it is so important for you to be involved in school board elections. And let's then make sure. Yes?
Actually, this is not a question, but I would like to add to that point. A friend of mine said, how many school board members are there in the United States? We have all these counties, and they usually have 5 to 7 school board members throughout the United States. How many parents do we have? Billions. If the parents and the citizens don't get involved, so be it. The schools will never change. It's still the responsibility of the citizen and the individual parents to get involved. And it's that simple. For all your efforts, Representative Perry, are fabulous, but if you don't have the support of citizens going to their school boards, your hands are effectively tied.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
The amendment that mentioned the idea that's kind of going around the country, I don't know whether you've been put into that. Mark Levin
Yes.
is one of the proponents of the Liberty Amendment, and of course it's going to take the state pushing up from the bottom and not a constitutional convention, but an amendment convention where only amendments would be discussed. So we definitely are very much in favor of an open dialogue on that. And I want to know if there's anything being said about that by the
There's on the Constitutional Convention, and I know I'm taking way too much time, but well, the amendment convention, I understand, and take the Constitutional Convention, which is a big push on that too. In the amendment convention, there's a guy in Gainesville who I think is probably one of the brightest guys when it comes to the Constitution and the Federalist Papers and understanding that he can sign them all. And him and his group and his people tell me it's the, all of those things are the most dangerous thing we can do.
That's what I'm saying. We're talking about amendment convention.
Yeah.
You need to be very careful how they word it.
Yes.
Because you don't want to open the door to fraud the Constitution. I mean, that's
Correct. Now, what I've got a meeting in Gainesville next week with people from the Mark Levin side. Now I've got people who are totally against Mark Levin on this side. And I tell you, it's confusing. I'm trying to listen to the debate. Again, when I make my decisions, I can't all of a sudden just jump in and say, oh yeah, okay, because I'm not sure, and I want to make sure any decisions as a representative for you, what are those decisions? So So,
Big distinction though.
and we got conservatives on both sides with totally different, and I know there's distinction, and I'm trying to get all the facts on
Give me a
both.
audio
of
tape
them.
of the book. I got the audio tape.
A friend who's going to be there presenting just brought me that book.
When you figure it out, would you
Fine.
put it on your website?
What's that?
When you figure it out, would you put it on your website?
We'll do that. And let me tell you what, I told you before, the answers are in Tallahassee. I'm one guy, y'all are, a whole group of people who can understand and read this. What I'm going to encourage you to do, though, is be educated, not try to separate the fact and fiction, which is very difficult to do sometimes. But we're not effective if we just take all information and take it all at face value. Even if it comes from a conservative, it may be good information, it may be their passing on bad information. But I've got a meeting set up, I've had a couple meetings, I've got a meeting with these two guys I think are really brilliant people, and we'll try to wait that out. So, but that's a big issue to stay in touch with, and again, y'all can be educated as well on both sides and try to explore it. Yes, ma'am.
But I think it would be in the interest of the states to take more control back to the state level and reduce the horrendous size of the federal government, which was never intended by the founders and framers of the Constitution. So I think the state governments should have a keen interest in doing that.
Well, after my first year in Tallahassee, when I came back to Gainesville, people asked me what's the biggest problem facing the state. I said it's the federal government.
Yeah.
That by absolutely the biggest problem facing the state of Florida is the federal government, and they're out of control. And so you're right. It's not our country wasn't founded on that. It goes against everything the way our country was founded on who's responsible for what, and the enumerated powers, restricted powers of the federal government, and unlimited powers of the state. Not unlimited, but certainly broader. So, the most important thing we have right now is that. And the concern is, and I know there's the amendment Constitution is different, I'm learning that, studying on that. But what we have to do is we certainly can't go any further with the federal government. It's already, just like I say, I think it's the worst thing that's the state.
17% so part of this would be to repeal those two, which is the income tax.
Right, which also, when you look at all the First Amendment said, the federal government shall not do this, shall not do this, shall not do this. It's that they shall do this. They changed from restricting them to opening things up. So, yes, sir. What, I'm sorry?
Danny Wolfman was such a good gamer.
Is that just a comment on gamers? Okay. Well, good. Yes, ma'am. Well, you heard the question is why did the state? Said this right. Is why does the state legislature not be more proactive in protecting the 10th Amendment and the state's rights, and why do we send our money up there to Washington on issues that they should not be in control of, basically? And it's not that we don't. The issue is how do you go about doing it? And believe me, you could take years and years as a state legislator before you got good. We're turned out, but you have people like me that come in here. I remember sitting in my first table and our first vote came up, and I'm looking at it and I don't think we're qualified to vote on this stuff because we're just average guys. We don't understand some of the nuances and how to get stuff done. You learn that. By the time you learn that, you're out. And then staff has all the power and control up in Tallahassee. So, but there is a push for that. Believe me, there's a lot of people who understand. Like I told you, I think it's the biggest problem facing the state of Florida. So I take it very seriously, and I think it is a problem. The issue is how do you affect it? How do you do that? And a lot of times you have to. It's going to take lawsuits, which you have to.